Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Okay, and what we're going to talk about today is React, but specifically one feature of React. That's props.children. That is a particular prop that's kind of built into how components work. And just talk about, first let's talk about what it is, but some of the cool tricks you can do with it. So to do that, let's first start a React project. So let me just put the Chrome browser over here to the side, and then I will get VS Code off here to the side so we can see them in tandem. And what I want to do is I'm going to go in terminal and spin up a new React project. So npx create React app. We'll do the @latest flag to make sure I'm using the latest version of create React app, and we'll just call this prop.children as the name of the project. So we'll let create React app generate the project. It's doing things, making the project. So there it is, prop children. Okay, just let that finish. Yay! So let me do a cd into the folder prop children. And then let's start the dev server. npm start. That's doing the thing. And default React project. There it is. Cool. Now I'm assuming y'all have had some experience with React, so that way none of this particularly new far as like the file structure and setting up a project and all that stuff. If not, do watch sort of my intro to React videos. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just delete everything inside the div that's inside app. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another component. So I'll create a new folder called components. And in that folder, we'll just create a file called component because I don't really care what the component represents. We just want to illustrate this feature. Component.js. And we will keep this simple. So export default function props. Okay, wants a name of the function. So let's see here. Component. There we go. And then we'll return for now an h1 that just, or a div. And in that div it just says component. That's all this component is. So there it is. That's a React component as bare bones as it gets. Okay, I'm going to import that React component into here. So I'm just going to do a import component from ./component/component. Okay, so now I can use it here. Component. And notice, instead of having it self-close, I'm having some open tags. And we can see, hey, look, it generates some text component. Now, since I have an opening and closing tag, can I stick something in the middle? Let's try. h1 hello world. But notice now that hello world doesn't appear anywhere. But it's in the app component. I see it there, so why isn't it not there? So here's what's happening in React. Whenever you pass anything inside of a component, so see how this is inside the opening and closing tag of the component tag, that ends up not being part of the DOM or doesn't get rendered. It gets passed to that component as a prop called children. So if I go to components and see there's the component and see it has a prop that's an h1 that's called children. Now what if I created two h1s? h1 goodbye world. See, now notice what happened. Instead of it being just the h1, now it's an array of JSX that I can inject. And I still can't see it. Okay, so what if I did want to see it? What I could do is I could replace, well, actually, let's keep the word component there. But let's say I wanted to appear after the word component. I could be like props.children. And see both h1s show up there. And if I wanted to show up before, I could put it up here, and then it'll be above the word component. So essentially I can kind of decide. And not only that, I could sit there and say, since it's an array right now, I could say, hey, let's put the first thing in the array here, and let's put the second thing in the array here. And see, now I can actually like play around with it, because it's going to treat each top level element. So again, because it's basically treating these as JSX expressions. And again, the JSX expression has to have one top level element. So since it sees that these are both at the top level, it just treats them as two different JSX expressions, which is something you can take advantage of if you want. Okay, so that's one really cool use of props.children. Yeah, that's pretty neat. And I mean, the thing is that, like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And you can kind of imagine a lot of different ways to use that. But another thing that people don't realize is you could pass functions. Okay, so imagine this. Let's say I pass a third item, and I put it here in curly brackets, and I just pass in an arrow function. Now take a look at my props.children array. See, the third item is a function. Okay, again, anything that I kind of pass in there. Let's see what happens if I try to pass in a string. I wonder if I say cheese. Yep, and see, now there's just a string of cheese in my children. So I can literally just kind of pass anything I want in this component. Okay, and you can do some pretty cool stuff with that. Okay, so, and this is kind of like how things like React requests and other libraries work. What they do is they have a component, and the component may like pull data from APIs, whatnot. So for example, if I were to make this a fetch component, okay? So let's just get rid of that for the moment. Okay, and right now it's complaining because there's no props.children 0, props.children, whatever. Okay, I'm just going to sit here and put props.children. Whatever props.children is, it's going to try to render here. Actually, I won't just, for now, we'll just put the word cheese. We'll come back to it. Okay, so let's pretend that we expect that you're going to also pass in a prop called fetch URL, okay, or fetch. Or actually just URL. URL would make sense. So we would say, hey, const URL, and we'll just structure that. And we'll structure children too. Okay, so that way we don't have to write props.children. So we'll just structure that from props. Okay, so we'll take those two out of the way. And then let me import React so we can use useState. So import useState and useEffect from React. Okay, refresh. Okay. So let's create some state for like some API data. So const data set data. Okay. And then we're just going to say it equals useState, and I'm going to initiate it as a null, so it's falsy. Okay, because what I'm going to do is I am going to do this. I'm going to say return, okay, return either based on whether data is null, so basically if data is truthy, then return children, the return value of children with data included. And if that is not the case, then just return h1, no data yet. Okay, cool. Cool. Nice. And then just in case, just so that we don't get we're going to get another error later, I'm going to give a default value in case we haven't defined the children yet. So the default value will just be a function that returns an h1 that says, hey. Okay, that'll be the default value. Okay, so as long as there's a prop called children, if there is no prop called children, it'll create a variable called, that's a function that returns an h1. That's a default value. This function is the default value of children, assuming that there is no children in props. I'm just doing that later on so that way it doesn't trigger an error once I have an API call successfully being handled. Okay, so now let's also do a use effect because we want to make an API call. Okay, so again, a use effect is always a arrow function and an array. I always like to just kind of like set that up first. And let's just use JSON placeholder. Okay, for like just a dummy URL. Oh, that must, nope, I want just to go to JSON placeholder. Oh, interesting. Looks like the website might have disappeared. There we go. So I'm going to just take this URL. We're going to make an API call to there. Okay. And the way this is going to work is that first we're going to check if there is, we'll just do this, const fetch URL dot then response return response.json. Again, I'm not going over like how to use fetch. I'm assuming you've probably used fetch before if you're asking to go this deep into React. Dot then data, and then we'll set the data. Set data to data. Okay. So right now there's no data because right now this is going to be returning undefined because the URL is empty. So I need to give some props. So let's go back to our application. I'm using component. So if I can pass it the URL of the prop of URL and pass it a URL. And see, now I get hey. So that means it's actually making the API call. So if I go inside the component, I can see like, look there in state, there's the API call. Cool. Okay. And it's using that default function because I actually haven't defined children yet. Because hey, look, there is no children. There's nothing between component. But now watch this. I will take this. I will define a function. Okay, that takes in the data and returns some JSX. And we'll just say returns in H1 with, we'll say returns in H1 for the moment. Let me just see what's inside the data. Because again, we'll walk through it. We'll say title. So data.title. Okay, and there we go. So it's making the API call, and I can change this to 2. And I can have several of these components. And I can say, hey, this one is for, making an API call to 2. This one's making an API call to 3. And see, now they're all making an API call and getting different results. Okay. So that's pretty cool. And I can change the JSX returns because what happens is that, again, anything in between the opening and closing tag gets passed under children. So this function gets passed as the children prop. And I am destructuring that children prop from props and assuming it's a function because I'm assuming that's how you're going to use my component because that's how I designed it. So then I call that children function and pass the data from the API because, again, when the use effect runs when the component loads, does the fetch to the API, then sets the state with the API data, and then that API data, the component re-renders, and this time data is no longer null, so it'll actually run children instead of running no data. Okay, so if you ever use like request or React request is like a very super popular library nowadays, or it's growing in popularity pretty quickly for making API requests in your React code. Okay, if you ever use API React request, this is pretty much how it works. Essentially, you have a component, and then in the props, you pass it like the URL you want to make an API call to and some other things, and then through props.children, you're passing it a function, and then it's passing the data to that function so that way you can generate JSX for it. So you can say basically the component just is a wrapper of logic and it's receiving the function. You could as easily just pass this function as a prop, so I could have just passed this function as a prop in here, but this kind of has a cool look to it, okay, and it has a kind of sort of elegance to it that you're thinking, okay, well, the thing I want to show up here should be within the tag. So that's kind of a cool way of doing it. Like, again, you could literally pass anything as props.children. It's anything that's in between the opening and closing tag, and you can use it in any way you want. But I mean, this React request library is becoming really, really popular, and it is kind of cool when you actually write it. Like, it has a cool look to it. So the question is, like, how does that work? Okay. And I mean, there's a lot more going on under the hood. Like, I've actually looked at the source code. It's like a lot more going on with caching and all that stuff. Let's see here, React request. There it is. Okay. But I mean, if you take a look at it, basically the way it works is you have this fetch component. You have this fetch component, and then again, you're passing it a function. You're passing it a function. And then under the hood, somewhere inside that fetch component, it's generating like this whole thing of fetching fail data. It's generating those properties and then passing them to that function that you're passing in. Okay, just kind of like we did in this particular code snippet here. Okay, just a little bit more complex. There's just more going on under the hood. Like, actually, let me see if I can bring up that repo. Here we go, GitHub. Let's go to the source code, fetch. Okay, so here's like what's going on under the hood. Okay, so you see, it's like it's breaking down your children prop, and then let's see here, somewhere it actually calls it. It's got to find the return value. Actually, yeah, that is it. Okay, so see, it returns. See, if children, long as there's the prop of children, if there is no children prop, it gives you back nothing. But if there is a children prop, then it's assuming that that's a function, because you should follow the documentation. And then it's going to pass all that data to the children function for you to, and then that's that. That's pretty cool. Okay, so that's what props. It's just another way to send props. Again, you could never use props.children and you would be fine. There's nothing that props.children does that's particularly unique, other than you can pass stuff between the opening and closing tag. But a lot of the time, it just kind of looks nice to be able to pass things between the opening and closing tag. Especially for people who write a lot of HTML, it just kind of feels natural. So kind of having those patterns where you can pass things in through the middle of the opening and closing tag is pretty cool. Okay, this is kind of similar to a feature called slots. So if you ever use slots in Svelte or native web components, the only real difference here, and because I think like with slots in other frameworks, you're just really passing like HTML. I don't think you can pass, like here where you can pass functions, I can pass strings, I can pass literally anything as a child property. But no, I think that's pretty cool. Like that's really neat. That's a killer thing you can do there. So yeah, that's pretty much the rundown of cool things you can do with props.children. Is, again, you can pass data and you can pass multiple pieces of data. So you could sit there and say, hey, pass a function, and then also pass some, like a second thing, like an array of something, and you can put it all in there, as long as they put it in the same order, and you grab stuff from the array as correctly. You could do that. Again, when you ask people to put stuff in an array, you always run into the issue that people put in the wrong order and whatnot. That's why like objects are usually a better transmission mechanism for like when you need a bundle of data, because people can name the properties and it doesn't matter what order they name the properties in. But yeah, this is what you can do with props.children. I mean, most people know that you can, pass HTML or pass more JSX in between the opening and the closing tag, and it shows up wherever you inject props.children. But here you can see, like, you can take it further than that, and that's really cool. I mean, there's a bajillion different ways you could take it from there and go even more advanced, but I just figured that'd be some good exposure, because I know a lot more people are starting to use that React request library more and more. To kind of make API calls. Again, that's called React request. I'm hearing a lot of hype about it. I still haven't used it yet, so I gotta try it out. But essentially, again, it's just you get this fetch component, and you can use this fetch component to fetch data. Okay, it just kind of takes care of a lot of the logic. So instead of you pass in the URL, you can pass in the method, all the details about how you want to make your API call, and then you just pass in the function. Okay, and and in the middle you just pass the function of what you want to do with the data. That's pretty cool. Very, very, very cool. Okay, see you guys later. My name's Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.